is wonderful, counting is marvelous, counting's terrific, and how...
Hello everyone, I'm Captain Logan, and welcome back to Counting Kryptofreaks. It's time for another Smallville commentary. We are at the end of Disc 1 of Season 3. It is the 4th episode. It's called Slumber, and this is the trippy dream sequence, or is it really all that trippy? I guess we'll talk about it. Episode featuring the music of one of my favorite bands of all time, R.E.M. This is kind of the R.E.M. promotion episode, and it's kind of gimmicky, but I also sort of like it, and we'll talk about it. This episode ended up not holding up as well as I was hoping it would. I remember this being one of my favorites from this season, and it's got a lot of the kind of standard tropes and cliches that I kind of remembered it getting away from, with this being kind of a standard Kryptofreak episode, but gets a little bit beyond the normal formula. It's a little bit more typical than I remember, and it's also actually not even really a Kryptofreak episode. It is in the sense that there's a random person who shows up who seems to have a power, but like we've had with a couple of pseudo-Kryptofreaks in the past, we don't really know where it comes from, and it seems to just be a natural but rare phenomenon, which is way worse than if it was just given to this character with kryptonite. So anyway, we'll talk about that and more as we move along. If you want to watch it with me, get out your DVDs, your Blu-ray, or go to Hulu and get it past all the menus. If you're watching it on disc, get it to timestamp 0, and if you're watching on Hulu, don't forget to pause between commercials if you are watching the commercial version. Is everybody ready to go? Let's get started. Get ready to press play whenever I say now, and here we go. Everybody, please press play right now. So in 2003, R.E.M. put out a greatest hits album called In Time, and this song and every song in this episode is made by R.E.M. and featured on that album. Imitation of Life, of course, immediately should be a tell that, foreshadowing that, a clue that we are in a dream sequence, and the fact that it is R.E.M. and R.E.M. means, rapid eye movement. This whole episode is about R.E.M.'s sleep. As we continue moving forward and we find out that each song is an R.E.M. song, that's one of the many tells that we're in a dream sequence, and it would be more clever, I think, if it weren't more obvious more quickly that something has to be wrong, because it's piling up all of the status quo changing events that this show is not going to do 4 episodes into Season 3. It's just not going to happen. Now, I don't necessarily put it past this show to do some of the stuff that it does, even if it were in the scene, and then come up with a way later to get itself out of it, or, play it for forced drama and work its way backwards. By the way, famously, Kristen Kurek didn't like taking her clothes off on screen, and that probably is not her body, just like in Nicodemus. But anyway, I'm a big R.E.M. fan. I remember this being a really cool kind of promotion thing when it came out. Yes, it's gimmicky. Yes, it's kind of shameless, but this show was doing that with soundtrack all the way through, and was kind of a big game changer because of its popularity in getting people into a lot of bands they didn't otherwise know of. I know I had a lot of that. I went and looked up a lot of bands that were in this show. I think it was really great for music, and yeah, they played a lot of whatever was really popular on the radio right then, but I think they also got some bands some notice that they wouldn't otherwise have, that weren't already getting a whole lot of airplay. I think this episode doesn't play entirely fair with the audience. Later on, once we know that we're in dreams, we're going to start putting a filter on it to make it clear that when the episode wants us to know that we're in a dream versus in real life. And I think that's kind of not playing especially fair with the audience. I think it would be better, especially because once we get to that place, it's already pretty obvious which scenes are in a dream and which scenes aren't. So I would have not put the filter on and just continued using the tells that we had already. And there's a thing with R.E.M. that I'll talk about later that it's also not consistent about, and I think that that's kind of a shame. It's kind of nice, even though it's sometimes sort of on the nose, that not only are they R.E.M. songs, but they also have something to do with the scene that we're in, which the show, of course, always tries to do, using incidental and popular music to inform the scene in some way or to reflect the scene in some way. Often, again, kind of on the nose, kind of heavy-handed. Sometimes it sounds like the song you're hearing is like narrating the scene, which can be really funny and silly. But I realized watching this episode again, just the sheer number of REM songs that are about dreams and perception and things that you can't be sure are real or not. And I think it's kind of neat that the connection in the lyrics and in the ideas of the songs is there, and it's not just the fact that the band is called REM. So that's kind of nice. So Sarah Conroy there is going to turn out to not actually necessarily be a Kryptofreak, like I said, which is irritating. It's going to turn out that she has more of a telepathic ability than your average person because she's in a coma, and Chloe's just going to come out and tell us that, and because she's just kind of our exposition head for this episode, and apparently that's enough. And apparently, people, if you get close to people in comas, they might be able to stick you in a dream and interact with you. And if that happened to Clark, I would assume it happens to a lot of other people in this universe, and maybe people just don't believe it and they're not talking about it, or it's just not being reported on because no one believes it. I don't know. Wow, that's quite a spread, Martha. She does a lot for breakfast. I meant to mention that there's a really weird close-up on Clark's chest in that first scene. We're obviously making a big deal out of the sexiness of that, and right away it should feel like something is off. Clark and Lana obviously have called it quits when they were beginning to get together earlier this season. We can't begin to believe, we're really naive if we actually buy that this early into the season they're already going to turn that around, and then they just start really laying that on thicker and thicker. So we do that with this scene where Jonathan is changing his tune about Lex and giving Clark a truck that looks suspiciously like the one that Lex gives him in the pilot. Maybe it even is that truck. It's been a while since I've looked at that, but it's blue, it's huge, it looks a lot like that truck. And so again, we should be going, wait a minute, something is really off here. And it's kind of fun to have a ongoing dream sequence that feels a little surreal, that we can't be totally sure if it's actually happening or not, but we should be so used to being kind of screwed with this show that we immediately, from scene one, don't believe anything that's going on. And I think the episode, especially because the writing isn't great in the dream sequences, and it's also not great outside of the dream sequences. I think it's on par between both. Dialogue writing, I mean. I think the episode thinks that it's being really clever, and that that it's making us actually think that this stuff might really be happening, especially because of how long it goes before we finally come out of this first dream sequence. So here's our second REM song. Again, should make you go, wait a minute, we never do this in Smallville, so something must be going on here. And Ilana's got more makeup caked on than normal. There's a lot of that in this episode where I can't decide if it's a production thing or if it's on purpose to just give us another small hint that things are slightly off. Our relationship has always been about pain and angst. It's not a good line. I want to give it to it because it's Clark, like, casting Lana in his dream, and his mind is giving her dialogue. But then this episode is not too far beyond that with its dialogue in the regular scenes. So that's unfortunate. I can't really give it that. It's just kind of a bad line. And so we're really supposed to think that maybe they're going to get back together again. It's the 4th episode this season. Of course we're not going to bite that. It's all just way too heavy and obvious. We could be a little bit more subtle about it. Or we could be really surreal about it and have a lot of fun with the dream sequences. I've had dreams that feel really real, and even when I wake up, I go, okay, that wasn't really that weird and surreal and out there. So it's not like every time you dream, it's a weird amalgamation of people and places and things, you know, all twisted up, like you have, say, in the last episode of, what is it, season 4 of Buffy, where we have a dream sequence and we keep crawling from one area to another area that aren't connected in real life, but we've connected in that episode, which is really neat. It would be neat if this took its cues from that. Well, no, I guess that would have been before this. But if it's wanting us to think that we're in the real world, obviously it can't do that, so maybe just don't lay things on so thick where Clark is imagining every status quo thing, potential change that we're constantly anticipating in this show. So we've got, maybe he'll get back together with Lana, maybe, like, everything's going so well for him, maybe Jonathan will start changing his tune about Lex, although... at least that one, I mean, he wouldn't go as far as he did in that scene, but at least that one tracks with Lex trying to help him out earlier in the season and asking if he could be part of their family. So, like, we could build to that one, maybe, and then here in a little bit, we're even going to have... Oh, and then we've got Chloe breaking down the wall of weird, and we're going to have Lex revealing that he knows Clark's secret. It's all just too much in one dream. Like... Does Clark have the same dream every night? Is this what, like, why is he dreaming about every single major thing in his life right now? Remember that this is not a supernatural dream, except that there is this girl, and apparently it's not even supernatural. Apparently it's just a regular ability a person in a coma might have. But there's nothing weird or supernatural about it, except for the fact that she shows up in it. She's not... like getting into his psyche and making this dream happen or change things around or anything. I also want to mention that Pete says that there's a history test that Clark didn't show up for. Of course, you have to do that, the test you didn't study for. I'm surprised he's not wearing pants. But he mentions that that test is worth 50% of his history grade. I never had a high school class where you had one test that was worth 50% of your grade. That kind of thing happens a little bit more in college, maybe, where it's mostly attendance for lectures and then you just have a test that's a lot of your grade. I have no idea if that's this dream or if that's real life. So again, as much as this, it's a little bit silly that Clark would be dreaming about every single major thing in his life like this in one dream. I love this scene so much. It's a really kind of fun wish fulfillment thing, even though it's easy and it's obvious that it's not actually going to count, but it still blindsided me, even this time, because I had forgotten about it. I remembered him talking about the sword, but I didn't remember that this was Lex telling Clark a story to build up to his revealing that he knows a secret. It's so well acted. It's decently well written. It's another one of those episodes where we write the Luthors a lot better than we write anybody else. And what's really interesting is it ends up playing as decent foreshadowing to when Lex finally does reveal to Clark in Season 7 that he knows his secret, because a lot of what he says in the scene is really similar to what he will say later on. You should have come to me. There's our first bullet, I guess our only bullet time this episode, which I'm counting even though it's in a dream sequence, just because there's the special effect that we saw it happen. But this is wonderful. I would have opened with this. I would, instead of having, and I think we do this just to get all of the major players in this episode, instead of piling it all on like that, just open with this. Just have this be a really scary nightmare, and make the whole episode about how Clark is worried about people, about Lex specifically finding out about a secret, and make it about that relationship, especially as Lex is trying to get closer to the Kents and also rejoining his father. Use these kinds of people that aren't themselves episodes or dream sequence episodes or whatever they are to actually see, he's really dramatic, he's got to open both doors at the same time, but to actually reveal something about our characters. And we would have been just as surprised if we had opened with that scene. But I guess maybe the problem with doing that is it would also maybe be stringing us along too much and messing too much with our expectations. Maybe then you just don't make the whole so much of the episode a dream. You know, if you did it that way, because if you made like the first 13, 15 minutes of the episode, Clark is dealing with Lex knowing his secret, I guess I would probably also cry foul on that too, where I'd be like, well, obviously 4 episodes into this episode, four episodes in the season, we're not going to do that. On the other hand, I have seen dream sequence episodes like this from other shows that handle that stuff so well and are so, character driven enough and are enough about how a person feels about that stuff that I kind of give it a pass. I think it is a thing you can do, you just have to make it work. So we've got this Spirit of Christmas Future guy with a costume that looks real Halloween costumey to me. Obviously we don't do a lot of actual villain costumes in the show, and we finally do one. It looks like that, and I kind of laugh every time it's on screen. So we are, 14 minutes into the episode. And so a third of this was one big long dream sequence, which again is fun. It just became really, really obvious that that's what we were doing. Her father's name is Kevin. Kevin Conroy. That's not true, I'm just joking. So, I have to count this episode for 3 creepy dream sequences. We've only had 4 total in the show before this, but every time he falls back asleep, it counts. So that's a thing, of course, that we've got to count. And again, it's not like the writing suddenly gets a lot better and that you suddenly can tell that much of a difference between the scenes. And this is going to be another really easy, not especially compelling mystery. It's immediately the person that we suspect it is that's forcing Sarah to stay in this dream state. It's a real easy villain plot. He's her uncle. He wants to keep the money rolling in because she inherited a lot of money, and so he's in control of it as long as she's asleep, and so he sadistically keeps her asleep all the time. And that's the theory that Clark and Lana kind of build, and it would have been nice if there was more to it than that. It's honestly not an episode with enough story to really fill out 45 minutes, which is part of why the dream sequences have to go on as long as they are. And again, if we had more fun in the dream world, rather than just making it about showing us things that we would like to see change in the status quo that the show is just not going to let happen yet, I wouldn't mind living there longer. And again, if it was more character-driven and if it was more about actually revealing something about our characters. And so now we have to kind of check back in a little bit and be like, okay, what you were seeing earlier with Clark and Lana was not what actually was going on, and now we've got to get back to this couple, or this ex-couple that was together, but now they're not, and get back to it being about Clark not telling her secrets. I like that we don't get all ultra-dramatic about it, and this easily could have been another one of those episodes where he won't let her in, and she starts berating him for it. Instead, he lets her in and tells her exactly what's going on, because to be fair, that's not a hard thing for him to do necessarily this episode, because there's not a lot at stake. He's not going to have to give anything. He's not risking anything necessarily by doing that. But sometimes he doesn't tell her things that he easily could. I've never really understood that. There have been times where his mind has been altered by something that had nothing to do with the fact that he's Kryptonian and the fact that he has superpowers, and I don't know why he doesn't tell her things. So I like that he's more proactive with her this episode, and he's more reasonable, and makes her kind of his partner here. And when they don't do this a lot, when we put these two together and have them be kind of the investigators, it actually sometimes works okay, and I like her more, and I wish that was more what this show was. Sometimes I kind of think that Lana and Chloe could have been one character. Obviously, I like Chloe, not the actress so much now, but Chloe more than I like Lana, and it's difficult to understand why he's so infatuated with Lana over Chloe. But I get so tired of that love triangle, and it starts to look, and this probably isn't the case, but it starts to look like from the very beginning we only had these two girls in this show together with Clark so that we could inevitably do an irritating love triangle with them. And it might have been interesting if she also had the investigative reporter thing, but there was something about her that was, quite different from Lois. I don't know if it is a bad idea to make Lana a reporter, but in the comics she's always been a pretty, active person in the public eye, also just like Lois. So it's not like he only goes after Lois over Lana because she's the small town girl that doesn't take risks and isn't politically active or whatever. Patron Saint of Travelers. The guy is called the Traveler, the bad guy in the dream. That's what Sarah has called him already. So immediately we should know that this guy is either who we've been seeing in the dreams or a personification of him, which is what it ends up being. It ends up being a manifestation that she has created in her mind of him, and it might have been more interesting if he actually was a Kryptofreak himself and could go into her dreams, and that's what was causing this. And honestly, that I would kind of buy more. There's that infamous Luthor Court building up the side shot that I'm always making fun of, because we just use it so much. So this is a subplot that is not fleshed out at all, that we only see the bookends of, and it feels like there was probably a story in between that we just didn't get to see. Lionel wants Lex to go through a psychological evaluation, and one thing I do like about this, by the way, is that it seems like, at least from Lex's perspective, and I don't have any reason to think that he's wrong about it, that the whole reason that Lionel wants the psychological evaluation is just to keep his ducks in a row and make sure that Lex didn't go crazy on the island. So we are connecting this to what we built at the beginning of the season, and we are bringing this show closer and closer to an ongoing story, or at least with threads that are constantly building and moving, as opposed to just a one-and-done episode show where we occasionally check in with subplots. And I kind of like that, but we don't really do anything with this. So Lex at first doesn't want to go through the psychological evaluation. He doesn't think he's crazy. He thinks it's pointless. And I think that's, from Lex's perspective, I think he's afraid of being psychoanalyzed, and we'll see this throughout the season. I think he doesn't like to look too close at his own psyche because he's scared of it, because he knows how close to his father he really is, and so he comes up with a lot of excuses and a lot of, here's how I personally feel about therapy and how it's kind of bogus and pointless, but I don't think he really thinks that. I think it's just that he doesn't want to look at himself up close too much. And that's an interesting thing to explore. The problem is, when we get to the end of the episode, he's going to change his mind about this, and we're not going to have seen that opportunity for change. He just has changed his mind about it. So we're back at school. We're going to bring up the history test again, but not how much of his grade it was. So that's a thing that I'm really stuck on and would really like to know. We're told that Clark was out of school for a few days, but we also know that he was only out for 36 hours. 36 hours is not a few days. I don't really understand that. No, Chloe, I don't see how you've ever seen a case at all. This is bunk nonsense pseudoscience unless we live in a heightened world in the Smallville universe where this sort of thing is already kind of accepted science, at least in smaller cases. and considered a regular thing that happens. So maybe in this world, telepathy is just a thing that people already accept, but I kind of doubt that that's the idea. When you have a plot device like kryptonite that kind of just creates a conceit so that you can have any powers you want to, unless there is a concrete explanation for those powers outside of kryptonite, it needs to be kryptonite. It can't be vague. It can't just be, well, she's more telepathic, and I just love that. More telepathic. I guess we all have a little bit of it. Just because she is in a coma. So that's nice. Chloe's not giving Clark crap for hanging out with Lana. Maybe she's getting past that a little bit. That would be wonderful. It seems like the show is working really hard to get us away from that love triangle, which I really appreciate, but of course it lasted way too long and did not have a satisfying resolution and was never interesting. So here we're getting the exposition about Sarah's parents dying and leaving her all of that money. This is our first of two Clark and Lana in the loft scenes. We've been getting a lot more of those lately. You notice Lana does not have as much makeup caked on as she did during the dream sequence. Maybe that was a thing that we did on purpose. Or perhaps it was just the lighting. I'm not sure. That might have been a mistake. There's, kind of happy accidents like that happen sometimes with a thing like that, where it's easy to chalk up mistakes or bad writing or whatever to the fact that, you're in a dream sequence. I just wish, again, that when we were in the dream sequences, people spoke a little bit differently than they do in real life, that you could kind of tell the difference. I mean, obviously, Clark knows these people and has a sense of how they speak, but if he were writing them, if he were casting them, maybe they would be at least a little bit different than they are in the real world. So see, Clark falls asleep, and now things are hazy because we know that it's a dream sequence. Like I said, I just don't care for that. I wish we would have left it the same. Especially because that is just for our benefit, right? It's not a stylistic choice. It's inconsistent. It's not that Clark is seeing it hazy because it's a dream. He falls asleep, and for a moment we're supposed to not be sure if it's a dream or not, and then immediately it's hazy, and even from his end now it's hazy, but it wasn't when he first fell into the dream. And I just feel like the episode's not giving its audience enough credit with that, really. Like, okay, we get it, he's in a dream, like, we're paying attention to the episode. This girl is here, and she's in a coma. We understand that it's a dream. I'm just not sure that we need that at all, and that we should be doing that unless it was that way the whole time. And of course, if it was that way the whole time, then what those dreams had been would be pointless to spend as much time with them as we did, but because we were supposed to think that we were maybe in the real world. This actress's name is Catherine Isabel. She's a character actress that was a childhood actress going all the way back to '89 and has been on all kinds of things, TV-wise especially. She is a Vancouver actress, which you can tell because of her slight Canadian accent. I also wish that we actually delved a little bit more into the psychological ideas that we kind of just play lip service to with this episode. We bring up Freud, we bring up Jung, we talk about whether or not you can really take anything, whether there's any validity to dream reading and that kind of thing. But it all sounds like the kind of stuff that maybe you read in, like an 8th grade science class or something. Once again, every time we get with Lex, the writing is better. I like, or at least much of the time it is. I should have looked up the samurai that the samurai group that Lex is talking about in the dream. It probably is fake. It probably doesn't actually exist. If it's real, that would be weird because it's obviously a thing Clark hasn't studied up on. But I love that Clark looks at that sword and asks what it really is, and that it's just from a Kurosawa movie. I like that Lex isn't a complete prude, that he likes popular culture, and that he is well-read, but he's not pretentious. That's really nice. And, there are places here where Clark is reacting to things based on the dream he had that is kind of silly and I don't really buy that he would do. And other places where I totally buy it, like when he flinches when Lex pretends to use that sword. I think that's absolutely wonderful. Partly because it's involuntary. Like, I would do that too. I totally buy that. If you woke up from that dream, you would be a little bit more on edge around Lex, even though you know that he doesn't know your secret, or at least you hope that he doesn't. Because he always plays things so close to the vest, it's possible that he knows and that he's just not telling you. That's very much what his father would do, considering, again, the thing with his blindness, for how long he was blinded and didn't tell anybody. And Clark wants to trust Lex, but really can't. I counted that as a rude super speed exit. That's pretty rude. He was... The guy brought him soda, after all. Mark Snow can get a little bit cheesy in his music sometimes. I think he knows what he's scoring, though. So yes, right away, we get another REM song. We know we're in a dream sequence. We don't need the filter. We don't need the filter! Stop it! This song is Bad Day, not to be confused with Fuel's Bad Day, and it is... I don't know why he's driving this truck in this dream and not the blue one, although I guess it's not that same continuity moving forward, so that makes sense. Okay, so I don't know if I should count 2 car crashes, because we technically see a car crash twice, or do we see, I'm trying to remember, do we see this and then when we cut to the real world it's just already crashed? I guess I should count that as 1 car crash. Even though it technically happens in kind of 2 worlds, one in his head and one in real life. I mean, I counted some bullet time earlier, but there wasn't a real-life component of it, but I still want to count it because, we saw it happen. But anyway, that song was Bad Day, which was the one new song that was on REM's album In Time in 2003. REM is retired now. They finished up in 2011 with a absolutely beautiful album. And I think it's I think it's one of, if not their best album. Collapse Into Now. And Uberlin is, I think, now my favorite song, maybe of all time. Cannot stop listening to that song. Check it out if you've not listened to it. Lana is going to get really lucky in this scene. That they get interrupted. Oh, no, she's got a lot of makeup in this scene, too. Okay, it's just this episode. It's not the dreams. So Jonathan's going to interrupt them, and I said Martha gets lucky, because Lana's kind of probing Martha, and there are some places early on in the show where Lana kind of gets the same runaround from Clark's parents as she does from Clark, and that should give her the signal, like maybe I'm pushing too much and sticking my nose in places where it doesn't belong. Like, she takes it personally too much that Clark won't tell her about a secret. She got better about that last season, but there are still places, certainly, again, usually just when we want to ramp up a scene for drama and, have her, previously on Lost, and have her guilt trip him for things that she is taking things personally and, assuming that it's just her. Clark is obviously keeping his secrets from everyone, and it's not that he doesn't trust her necessarily, and even not knowing what exactly the secret is, she has to understand when she's talking to his parents especially, and his parents are keeping things from her, that, oh, they're not telling anyone. It's not just me. Maybe this is for my own protection. Maybe this is for, even if I knew what it was and decided they were wrong, maybe I should respect them and not keep probing. But anyway, that easily could have been a scene where Martha, kind of showed her hand too much. And if it had continued going on, I think she did the best she could at giving her an explanation for her question without giving away too much. And now this is just going to degenerate into a real, typical Kryptofreak type episode. Because again, I don't know if she's actually a real Kryptofreak. It's dumb that Clark brings up the lilacs. Wouldn't you walk into this room being really careful not to say anything from that dream? Specifically, anything about the girl you've never met before. I just feel like even Clark might be a little bit smarter than that. So this episode had kind of a neat premise that it did not know how to execute by the end. It's just not sure how to wrap things up. It goes, well, it goes against the grain a little bit with your standard Kryptofreak formula, where we can't really tell if the person with the power is the person in the dream or this guy keeping her sedated, and it's not really the same kind of typical bad guy wanting revenge on someone plot that we usually get with a Kryptofreak episode. But then it kind of degenerates into something like that when the bad guy has to kidnap Lana at the end, and Clark's gonna save everyone with a real easy use of his powers, which, by the way, he will say in this dream, I don't have, and then use them. And I'm not even saying it's a problem that he... This shot is kind of fun. Not the best CG ever, but for 03 on TV, it's not terrible. I don't know if people will agree with that. It's not the worst. That's the best that costume looks, I guess. But that's hilarious. I mean, and he's got like a Power Ranger monster voice. Oh, there you, Sarah. We need to make him grow and have Clark get in a Megazord. And might be nice if Clark used his imagination in his own dream and tried some things that he even can't do, with kryptonite. I mean, think about it, or with his powers. I mean, think about it. This is essentially a waking dream, right? Like, Clark knows that he's in a dream, and usually in real life, if you know when you're sleeping that you're in a dream, you can control it and you can kind of do whatever you want to. They're in his dream. So I don't know why he can't do that. And so I don't have a problem with the fact that he uses his powers in the dream. I think it's weird that he says, I don't have any powers. Well, how do you know? You didn't try to use them. And then suddenly you use them. And it acts like just a normal, regular in real life scene. That suit looks even worse when it's not dark. And then he just uses his heat vision and blows up the bad guy and wakes up. Good job. And now he knows that Lana's in trouble because, conveniently, Sarah can hear things when she's, from her coma. But at least we set that up quite a bit earlier in the episode. So that's at least a rule that we've established. That's good. And, oh, you know what? I forgot about this count. That is convenient unconsciousness. Sometimes I'll recognize something... Convenient unconsciousness as we're watching for the show. So I don't have the total for that one in front of me, but that is definitely a case of convenient unconsciousness. I don't think he necessarily has to let the bad guy know that he's got powers. Well, he's got to run and catch that, but I guess he could just... No, he didn't really have to do that. He could have grabbed it, and he could have run... And then he could have just super sped and grabbed Lana, and then the guy would have no idea what happened. So he knocks him out, and I don't remember what happens to him, if he goes to prison or what. Maybe they talk about it at the end of the episode. So Lex has had some kind of a character arc that we didn't see here. He's decided to go through the full battery of mental tests. And you kind of wonder what his angle is. I don't always know if Lex has something else behind, up his sleeve when he's telling Lionel the reasons he's doing things. Obviously, there's this constant tete-a-tete between them. There's a grain of truth to a lot of what they say, but they don't always come right out. They don't want to give each other too much, of course, because they're adversaries before they're allies. So when he says he thinks that he only has his best interests at heart, that, of course, is a lie. But when he says that he changed his mind because he was operating from a position of fear instead of strength, that I believe. I do kind of like that it's not until the very end of the episode that we bring up the island thing. Because that seems like a thing that he would, kind of bury deep and would be afraid to even talk about. I also kind of like when you're rich, you're not crazy, you're eccentric. You can justify kind of anything with that. That's kind of recognizing that just the colors with the Smallville Medical Center are so ridiculous. That is just the tackiest building. And inside is even worse. 252. Anytime I notice the number 52 even inside of a larger number in DC, I cannot, whenever I see that, I can't help but notice it. But yeah, when Jonathan, or excuse me, when Lionel says you're not crazy, you're eccentric, that's almost like recognizing money does something to you, and it's just human condition. There's nothing we can do about it, and we're privileged, and it doesn't make us crazy. It just makes us eccentric. Might that also justify behavior for him? I think it probably does. So I was talking over the scene. I'm still not sure if they mentioned what happened to her uncle or not, but I'm not that curious. Okay, but beyond his being in love and resisting it, what did you make of the Lex trying to hit him with a sword bit? Wouldn't she have more to say about that? You should watch out for that Lex guy. I'm really worried about that whole thing. So this is trying to make the audience that really wants them to get together more hopeful. So again, 4 episodes in, we're not going to immediately put Clark and Lana back together, but this is kind of telegraphing we're not done with that yet. We're going to keep going to it. Unfortunately, from my perspective, especially because since this show's not going to get too far and away from the Superman status quo later, with certain things it does and with certain things it doesn't, but from the very beginning, I was assuming that, Lana's not going to be Clark's soulmate. They're not going to actually get together forever, which is why it would have been a lot nicer to just do that, to just, kind of make them high school sweethearts like they are in the comics, and let them have a really good, healthy relationship, and then something happens with probably having to do with Clark and his powers that break them up, as opposed to they just can't even get together. We have to do that typical TV thing. So Lana nearly getting killed is just a regular fact of her life, and she's gotten really used to it, but was making a much bigger deal out of it last episode when there was a Kryptofreak that tried to kill her, and a guy who just wanted them all dead, who tried to save her, and she was kind of okay with that. Yeah, I feel kind of emotionally manipulated a lot by this show. And I certainly have that with this episode, where it's like, oh no, it's, we're not gonna get away from this relationship. We might put them together again. But yeah, and then you might break them apart right away too. And Clark immediately saying skinny dipping, I think, is kind of stupid. Like, I get that he's thinking about that, and I get that he's a teenage boy, and he had that dream, and, you know, yes, of course he did. But when she says swimming and he says skinny dipping, that's just like the lilac thing, where I'm like, I just don't buy you would say that. That's it, and that's where I get off saying that the writing in this episode, outside of the dreams, is not much better than it is inside of the dreams. So anyway, this one is okay. It's, like I said, I still kind of like the REM gimmick, okay. I wish that was the major tell, and again, I don't like the, I don't like the filter thing, but it doesn't hold up as well as I remember it, but it's, but like I said, that Kryptofreak is, or I guess not Kryptofreak, but Sarah Conroy, Catherine Isabel, she gives a really genuine performance. I think she's quite good. I like her a lot. It might have been neat for her to come back, to come up with some sort of an excuse to bring her back. Obviously, it probably wouldn't be a dream thing. But anyway, let's go ahead and get to the count, shall we? No Kryptofreaks this episode because we're just not sure if anybody was actually affected by, well, even not that we're not sure. I'm about positive that this is not related at all to Meteor Rock, so we can't count Sarah Conroy or her uncle as a Kryptofreak. We have 3 creepy dream sequences. We have 1 instance of bullet time, which was in a dream, but again, I'm counting it anyway. We have 2 instances of Clark and Lana in the loft. We have 2 rude super speed exits. We have 1 convenient unconsciousness, which I missed earlier, and we have, I'm going to count just 1 car crash. Once again, I forgot to give all of the totals there, so that's, let's see, 7 creepy dream sequences. That's 20 bullet times, 20 instances of Clark and Lana in the loft, 14 rude super speed exits, and 21 car crashes. I have 1 question to ask Jarrell when I get to heaven this time, and I talked about it already, but it's the notion of how easy the telepathy is, and if that's a thing that just a lot of people know about and no one talks about. I don't understand that. Is it supernatural? Is it not? What is it? That seems really too easy, and if it's... And also, it's really super convenient that she moves in next door to Clark, who's dealt with a lot of these really weird supernatural happenings, and it happens to be him that she gets... you know, she gets into Clark's head, nobody else's. Like, it could have been Martha, it could have been Jonathan. Why was it Clark? It doesn't seem to have anything to do with his powers or his physiology or anything. 1 line would have fixed that. Maybe, I mean, not that Chloe knows anything about his physiology, but it might have been nice if Clark or his parents had surmised, well, maybe it has something to do with the fact that you're Kryptonian. Like, I don't understand what exactly that has to do with it, but it didn't happen to me, it didn't happen to your mother, it's not happening to anyone else that's anywhere close, and these are not farms that are super far away, so it's not like there are other houses that are close enough that she could have gotten into other people's heads. But no, it's Clark, because he's our protagonist, and because we wanted to do this concept for an episode. I'm going to give this episode a 3 out of 4. That might be a little bit generous, but, that might be a little bit generous, but I still... enjoy the things I enjoy about it, and I think it's, I do think it's still an above-average Kryptofreak-esque episode. If there's anything that I didn't count that you noticed, let me know about it, and I'll make sure to add it to the count. And in the meantime, thanks a lot for listening, everybody. Sure appreciate it. I am Captain Logan, and consider this episode counted.
Counting is wonderful, counting is marvelous, counting's terrific and how